Donald Trump stood in front of the country and did what leaders usually do when they are least certain of victory. He said America was winning. He said the objectives were almost complete. He said Iran would be hit even harder in the next 2 to 3 weeks. He said the war was moving in America's direction. And that is the moment I want to start with, because that is the moment people are reading the wrong way. Most people hear those words and think the question is simple. Will the United States invade Iran on the ground or not? Will there be tanks, Marines, occupation zones, another desert war, another television map with arrows moving toward Tehran? That is not the deepest question. The deeper question is what kind of chain reaction begins the moment Washington decides that air power is not enough. Because once the United States crosses from bombing Iran to entering Iran, this stops being a war over targets. It becomes a war over structure, over oil, over food, over shipping, over the dollar system, over whether the old American order can survive one more shock like this. That is the real story. The real story is not whether America can enter Iran. It is what breaks the moment it does. Let me show you why. Iran is not Iraq. Iran is not Afghanistan. Iran is not Libya. Iran is a huge country with nearly 90 million people. Mountain barriers on the west, deserts on the east, long, difficult approaches from the south, and enormous interior depth around Tehran and the Central Plateau. If you attack from Iraq, you run straight into the Zagros Mountains. Those mountains are not a detail. They are the battlefield. They are where convoys slow down, where helicopters become vulnerable, where small units disappear, where supply lines stretch, where the stronger army slowly becomes the more exposed army. If you attack from the east, you face distance, desert, weak infrastructure, and the problem of beginning very far from the political heart of the country. If you attack from the Gulf, you still have to push in and through difficult terrain, while every port, ship, fuel line, and staging point becomes a target. So the first reality is geographical. Again. Ground invasion of Iran is not just difficult, it is structurally ugly from the opening hour. And then comes the second reality, the one that matters even more. Iran has spent decades preparing for exactly this scenario. Not a general war, not abstract deterrence, a specific American attempt to break the regime by force. That means tunnel networks, underground missile storage, dispersed launch sites, hardened logistics, pre-planned drone use, anti-helicopter tactics, convoy interdiction, attritional warfare, built around patience instead of spectacle. The United States is always strongest in the opening act. It is strongest when it can hit first, move fast, seize the initiative, dominate the skies, and flood the information space with proof of momentum. Iran's entire defensive logic is built around surviving that first act. That is the piece people keep missing. The goal is not to stop America from entering. The goal is to make entry meaningless, to let the first punch land, and then turn the rest of the war into a slow, expensive, humiliating argument about time, blood, and supply. America has seen this movie before. Vietnam taught it that tactical superiority does not solve political endurance. Iraq taught it that toppling a regime is easier than controlling what follows. Afghanistan taught it that the strongest army in the world can still lose to geography, patience, and a war. Without a clean exit, Iran has studied all three. That is why a ground invasion would not be a clean escalation. It would be a conversion. A conversion of American military power into a long chain of new vulnerabilities. And once that conversion begins, the next battlefield is not inside Iran. It is the Strait of Hormuz. This is where the analysis has to get harder. If American troops go in on the ground, Iran does not simply fight in the mountains. Iran widens the cost. It moves to the sea, to energy, to infrastructure, to the arteries of the global economy. Hormuz is not just an oil story. It is the pressure point where shipping, insurance, energy pricing, fertilizer inputs, industrial planning, and market confidence all collide. The lazy version of this argument says oil goes up. That is true, but it is not enough. A real escalation in Hormuz means crude spikes. Yes, but it also means fear inside tanker markets, fear inside food markets, fear inside industrial supply chains, fear inside every country whose inflation and political stability depend on energy moving normally. The same waterway does not only carry oil and gas significance, it sits inside the wider system that feeds fertilizer production, petrochemical chains, shipping confidence, and global expectations about normal trade. When that system is destabilized, the damage does not stay in one sector. It jumps. That is when a war stops looking regional. If Hormuz becomes fully militarized during a ground invasion, oil can move toward levels that punish every importer on Earth. Food inputs tighten, insurance costs explode, semiconductors and manufacturing face new stress through chemicals and shipping instability. Markets that have been floating on the fantasy of controlled escalation suddenly discover there's no such thing. And then we reach the part almost nobody wants to talk about. Honestly, the American empire does not rest only on aircraft carriers It rests on the financial architecture under global trade, and that architecture rests heavily on energy confidence. For decades, the petrodollar system worked because the world could assume Middle Eastern energy would keep flowing inside an American protected order. Countries needed oil, oil needed dollars, dollars recycled into American debt financed American power then protected the system that made the debt financeable. That loop is the foundation, not morality, not speeches, not democracy promotion. The loop. Now imagine what a ground invasion of Iran does to that loop if the Gulf is destabilized at the same time. The Gulf monarchies become more exposed, not less energy infrastructure becomes more politically vulnerable. Asian and European importers begin asking a brutal question. If the system depends on American protection and American escalation is now the thing breaking the system, how long do we keep organizing our future around that system? That question is poison, because reserve currency power is not only about size, it is about trust. It is about the belief that the organizing empire can still organize. The moment enough countries begin to doubt that they do not need to revolt all at once, they only need to diversify slowly, hedge quietly, and search for alternatives more aggressively than before. That is how imperial erosion really happens, not in one speech. In 1,000 portfolio decisions, energy contracts, reserve shifts, and strategic hedges. So if a ground invasion triggers a prolonged Gulf shock, America may still win battles and still lose altitude. Now let me take the argument one layer deeper, because this is where Trump enters the story in a way most analysts are too embarrassed or too simplistic to examine. The standard view is that Trump is reckless, impulsive, and tactically chaotic. Sometimes that is true, but that does not mean there is no underlying pattern. There may be a darker logic here. Not that Trump wants a neat victory in Iran, not even that he expects one, but that parts of the American right no longer think the old global order is worth preserving at its current costs. That is the key. The old bargain was simple. America would underwrite the system, police the sea lanes, stabilize the energy routes, absorb the debt burden, and in return dominate the financial architecture of the world. But inside the United States, more and more people think this bargain hollowed the country out. Manufacturing left, debt exploded, inequality deepened, cultural consensus collapsed. The empire stayed global while the republic decayed at home. From that perspective, the old order is not a treasure, it is a burden. And once you think that way, a shocking possibility appears. What if certain people in Washington no longer fear the collapse of the old system as much as they fear continuing to subsidize it? What if they are willing to let parts of the old order crack, provided North America emerges from the turbulence more self-sufficient, more resource secure, and less obligated to carry everyone else? That is why the talk about Greenland, Canada, Mexico, Venezuela, Panama, and the wider northern hemisphere matters. On the surface, it looks random underneath. It points to a fortress logic, a continental logic, a logic that says the age of open ended global management is dying. So build a harder inner block before the full fracture arrives. Energy, food, water, minerals, industrial base, defensible geography, hemispheric control, 2 oceans. A smaller but tougher imperial core, you can call that fantasy, you can call it delusion, but you cannot call it incoherent. And once you see that possibility, the Iran question changes. In round invasion would still be militarily dangerous. It would still be economically destructive. It would still risk dragging the whole system toward depression. From the perspective of people who think the old order is already unsalvageable, that destruction may not look like pure failure. It may look like an accelerator toward a harder, more self-protective North American order built after global integration breaks down further. I am not saying that strategy is wise. I am saying that if you think history is moving toward fragmentation anyway, then controlled demolition starts to look like strategy instead of madness. That is the disturbing possibility here. And this is why the next step matters so much. If America invades, the first result is not victory or defeat. The first result is escalation into multiple theaters of consequence at once. Inside Iran, attritional war. Inside Hormuz, energy shock. Inside markets, repricing of risk. Inside the Gulf, fear of infrastructure exposure. Inside reserve strategy, deeper doubt about the future of the old financial order inside Washington itself. A test of whether the people running this strategy actually understand the chain reaction they are touching. There are only a few real scenarios after that. In the first, America gets bogged down quickly. Casualties rise. Hormuz remains unstable. Markets crack. Allies distance themselves. Domestic support weakens. Washington discovers that the first weeks of triumph were the easiest part of the war. In the second, America avoids total bog down, but becomes trapped in a long holding pattern, bleeding money, mass burial, and legitimacy, while the global economy slowly absorbs the costs. In the third, and this is the one that should frighten people most, the military campaign and the systemic shock together become the mechanism through which the old order finally loses coherence. That would not mean immediate American collapse. Empires do not vanish in one season. It would mean something more dangerous, a world that stops believing the old center can keep the structure intact. And once that belief goes, power does not disappear. It hardens, it regionalizes, it militarizes, it becomes more brutal and less universal. That is why this is not just an Iran question. This is a question about what kind of world comes after the old American guarantee starts failing in full public view. So let me end where I began. When Trump says America is winning, do not only ask whether that is true on the battlefield, ask what kind of victory even remains possible once a ground invasion begins. Because if American troops go into Iran, the story is no longer about whether Washington can punish Tehran. The story becomes whether the attempt to break Iran also breaks the structure America has been standing on for half a century. That is the real danger. Not that America invades Iran and gets one more bad war, but that America invades Iran and discovers that the next war is not really inside Iran at all. It is inside the world order that made American power possible. And if that order cracks under the strain, then what comes next will not be a return to normal. It will be a harsher world, a poorer world, a more regionalized world, a world where ordinary people pay for elite strategic theories with inflation, shortage, grief, and time. That is why this matters, not because invasion is dramatic, because invasion, in this case, may be the moment the cost of maintaining the old order becomes greater than the system can hide. And once that happens, the question is no longer whether America can win in Iran. The question is who survives the world that follows.